Good day, everyone. For today's The Contemporary Word lesson, we will study about the structures of globalization, the global economy. Last time, we talked about the introduction to globalization, defining the globalization, the overview of globalization. Today, in the global economy, we will discuss about the following: the economic globalization, the interconnected dimensions of economic globalization, the economic globalization phenomenon, the international monetary system, the four monetary regimes, the classical gold standard regime, the gold exchange standard regime, the Bretton Woods system regime, and the global actors in economic globalization. When people say we live in the global economy, they are talking about the interdependence of nation. The interdependence means interconnection or interconnectedness. This is now what we call as the global economy. It is also called as the world economy or the economic globalization when we have the international exchange of goods and services, the free movement of goods, capital, services, technology, and information. Again, last time we talked about globalization, and in globalization, we have studied that economy is part of globalization, wherein we have the connectedness to others. Economic globalization is the increasing integration of economies around the world, particularly through the movement of goods, services, and capital across borders. It is the movement of people and knowledge across international borders. The global economy will concern with globalization, the production, the finance, the market, technology, organization regimes, institutions, corporations, and labors. Expanding because of emergence of transnational trade and increased exponentially due to increased rate of communication and technology. Remember that banking and finance, which has no local boundaries, if a giant bank in one country collapses, banks in other countries also suffer. When we are talking about the global economy, we're also talking about globalization. Again, let us give highlights to what we have learned and study on the lesson one. We have three categories of globalization: political or governance, economic globalization, and socio-cultural. Now, when we are talking about economic globalization versus the internationalization, it is about the extension of economic activities of nation state across borders, while the former is functional integration between internationally dispersed activity. Economic globalization is rather a qualitative transformation than just a quantitative change. The economic term globalization is nothing but a process making the world economy an organic system by extending transnational economic process and economic relations to more and more countries and deepening the economic interdependence among them. Yes, this is true in business because of internet. In the past, only large corporation can be called as multinational. But today, even small businesses can be multinational or can trade or exchange of products with the other companies of any part of the world. That's the reason why we have the advance of communication. The advance of communication has a change. The internationalization it describes as designing a product in a way that it may be readily consumed across multiple countries. The company is looking to expand their global footprint beyond their own domestic market. Understanding consumers abroad may have different tastes or habits, or what we call as the branching out into international markets. However, there are taxes that we need to pay or the businessman needs to pay every time they have to import or export goods and services. But due to WTO or World Trade Organization, they have the limitations of the trade barriers. While when we talk about WTO or the World Trade Organization, it ensures the trade flow as smooth and freely as possible. Now, in short, when we talk about internationalization versus economic globalization, the internationalization refers to increasing of enterprise of the asserting local economy in international market. On the other hand, the globalization or economic globalization is the integration of the local markets into one global market. Additionally, the internationalization focus more on expansion of client base of local business in the global or international market. On the other hand, economic globalization focus more on exchange of products and services from the interaction of local market to global market, or in short, it has many results. While the internationalization results include in increasing the influence of the enterprise of local markets and globalization. We have four interconnected dimensions of economic globalization: the globalization of trade of goods and services, the globalization of financial and capital markets, the globalization of technology and communication, and the globalization of production. But where do economic globalization happen? Economic globalization phenomenon has a Silk Road. A Silk Road is a best example of archaic globalization, or the relationships between communities and states and how they created by geographical spread of ideas and norms. It happened during in where China shared goods and ideas and expanded throughout the world through Mediterranean, India, and Southeast Asia. Well, the silk has a huge effect in society. As the market grew, more and more people moved into silk production. It was from adopting from Fernand Braudel's innovative concept of long duration or slow moving, the world system analysis in the 16th century. Now we go to the international monetary system. The international monetary system is the most central area in international economy because of the trade, investment, and finance, which all depend on the availability of money and credit. That is why the IMS has what we call as the IMF, or the primary purpose is to ensure the stability of the international monetary system. The IMF is the International Monetary Fund. That's the system of exchange rates and international payments that enables countries or their citizens to transact with each other. We have the different functions of the IMS, the current account surplus, capital accounts, the balance of payments, the statistical discrepancy, the change in reserves requirements, and the total of the country's account, capital account, statistical discrepancy, and change of reserves is equal to zero minus the balance of payments. The IMF, or the International Monetary Fund, is a financial institution located on headquarters in Washington, D.C. It has a financial institution of 190 countries. The first function is the current account surplus. The current account surplus is a positive current account balances, meaning to say that the country has more exports than imports of goods and services. While the benefits of exports is about the earnings or investments abroad, or and the incoming transfer payments such as the aid and remittances, they are recorded as the credits. While the imports are the foreign investors' earnings on investments in the country and outgoing transfer payments that are recorded as the debits. The current account surplus, it indicates the value of a country's net foreign assets, or the assets and less liabilities. They grew over the period in question. When credits exceed debits, the country enjoys a current account surplus, meaning that the rest of the world is in effect borrowing from it. A current account surplus increases a nation's net assets by the amount of the surplus or the capital accounts. The second function is the capital accounts. The capital account is part of the country's balance of payments. It measures the financial transactions that don't currently affect a country's income, production, or savings. Their value is based on what they are expected to produce in the future. It is the part of the balance of payments which records the net changes in a country's financial assets and liabilities. Key points to remember in the capital accounts. The capital account on the national level, it represents the balance of payments for a country. The capital account, it keeps track of the net change in a nation's assets and liabilities during a year. The capital accounts balance will inform economists of whether the country is a net importer or net exporter of capital. The third function is the balance of payments. The balance of payments has the transactions which consist of imports and exports of goods and services, and capital as well as transfer payments such as the foreign aid and remittances. In short, the balance of payments is what we call as the record of all international financial transactions made by the country's residents. A balance of payment deficit means the country imports more goods, services, and capital than it exports. It must borrow from other countries to pay for its imports. The main body for the balance of payments, therefore, informs us about the state's overall position in terms of financial assets and liabilities. The balance of payments summarizes the economic transactions of the economy with the rest of the world. These transactions include exports and imports of goods, services, and financial assets, along with transfer payments like the foreign aids. Please uh, don't get be confused about the balance of payments. The balance of payments is just the records of all or summarizes all the economic transactions. Number four function is statistical discrepancy. Statistical discrepancy is equal to gross domestic product less the gross domestic income. These two measures are the same. The difference reflects less than perfect source data, the difference between demand and supply in national accounts. Even though by definition, the item should be equal in the national economy. Let us give highlights on the GDI and GDP. GDI, gross domestic income, versus the GDP or the gross domestic product. The GDI, it counts what all participants in the economy make or take in, like wages, profits, and taxes. While the GDP, it counts the value of what the economy produces, like goods, services, and technology. The gross domestic product, it measures the activity as the sum of all expenditures in the economy. It also measures the monetary value of final goods and services produced in a country over the period of time. The gross national product, on the other hand, or the GNP, it counts all the output of the residents of the country. For example, if the US own a company which has a manufacturing or factory in the Philippines, the output of this manufacturing or factory would be included in the Philippine gross domestic product, but the US gross national product. The GDI, or the gross domestic income, it measures the nation's economic activity that is based on all of the money earned for all the goods and services produced in the nation. The next function is the change in reserve requirements. The change in reserve requirements has each country has what we call as the central bank, that is stability in balance of payments. Now, what is a central bank? A central bank is a reserve bank or monetary authority, which has an institution that manages a state's currency, money, supply, and interest rates. Each country has a central bank or oversees the monetary system of the country. In the Philippines, we have a central bank and now what we call as the BSP or the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas. We have the four monetary regime, the classical gold standard, the gold exchange standard, the Bretton Woods system, the fixed exchange rate, or the non-system of floating and fixed exchange rate from 1973 to present. It is best that we have peace in globalization or in the system of IMS. In reality, we have financial increase of transaction or permission from the more or most powerful state like America. The international monetary system is the rules and standards for facilitating international trade among the nations. The first monetary regime is the classical gold standard. The classical gold standard is from 1870 to 1914. It's after the 1918, which had the mechanism that prevented flows of gold reserves of the balance of payment from becoming too positive or too negative. In the classical gold standard, the fixed rate regime in which the government announces and adhere to specific exchange rate from their currency in relation to gold. By making the national currency values more stable, the gold standard facilitated trade and other transactions between economies. Meaning to say, they have the gold, which is their currency, become the currency, which that's more stable. The next one is the gold exchange standard. In gold exchange standard regime, the countries agreed to convert paper money into a fixed amount of gold. It is a monetary system where a country's currency or paper money has a value directly linked to gold. That's because gold has a more preserved or what we call as, yes, the preserved value. It was the period before John Keynes that the US dollar and the British pound or the euro has the value of 2.45 to 1 euro. The gold standard supported by the Britain, France, and Germany. But then afterwards, this gold standard in 1914 to 1944, they maintain the gold standard even though we have the World War One that really affects the trading. That is why the gold exchange standard failed because of the Great Depression. The Great Depression is the worst economic breakdown or downtown in the history of the industrialized world that lasts from 1929 to 1939, where the stock market crash in 1921 that sent to Wall Street, where we have lots of investors into panic and wipe out investors' economic crisis. It was 1933 where bank failed for 50%, and we lost lots of investors. That is why we have now the Bretton Woods system. In the Bretton Woods system, they have the agreement in 1944 to 1973, the negotiation in July 1944 by delegates from 44 countries at the United Nations Monetary and Financial Conference, which held in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. That is why it named as the Bretton Woods Agreement. Under the Bretton Woods system, the gold was the basis for the US dollar, and other currencies were pegged into the US dollar's value. The Bretton Woods system effectively came into the end in the early 1970s with the President Richard M. Nixon, which announced the US would no longer exchange gold for US currency. And so we have the non-system of floating and fixed exchange rate from 1973 to present. And the Bretton Woods system collapsed in the 1970s. They created a lasting influence on international currency exchange and trade through its development of the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. The floating exchange rate is a regime where the currency price of the nation is set by the forex market based on supply and demand relative to other currencies. This is in contrast to the fixed exchange rate, in which the government entirely or predominantly determines the rate. We also have the global actors in economic globalization, the International Government Organization or IGO, the International Non-Government Organization, and the multinational corporation. The IGO are the examples United Nations, Organization of American States, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, the World Health Organization, and etc. The IGO, it is an organization which made up of more than one national government. The governments are the members of the IGO. On the other hand, the international non-government organizations are the not-for-profit voluntary associations operating at the international, transnational, or global level with members of participants from many countries like Red Cross, Amnesty International, International Union Against Cancer, and etc. The last but not the least is the multinational corporations. From our previous lesson, we have learned about the multinational corporation or the transnational corporation. It is the corporation that registered and operates in more than one country at a time. They have the headquarters in one country and operates fully or partially owned subsidiaries in other countries. We also have the effects of economic globalization on developing countries. Increased standard of living, access to new markets, Decrease employment. The first one is increased standard of living. In increased standard of living, economic globalization gives government of developing nations an access to foreign lending. When these funds are used in infrastructure, including roads, healthcare, education, social services, the standard of living in the country increases. If the money is used only selectively, however, not all citizens will participate in the benefits. The access to new markets is something about being profitable or having an access to other countries in the world, such as the Starbucks. We can see Starbucks in other parts of the country. In Seattle, 1970, it started becoming profitable in 1980s, which now the Starbucks has more than 20,000 stores located in almost major countries in the world. Access to new markets. In globalization, it leads to freer trade between countries. This is one of the largest benefits to developing nations. Homegrown industries see trade barriers fall and have access to a much wider international market. The growth this generates allow companies to develop new technologies and produce new products and services. However, on the third one is what we call as the decreased employment. We have the influx of foreign companies into developing countries, which increases employment in many sectors, especially for skilled workers. However, improvements in technology come with new businesses and that technology spreads to domestic companies. Automation in the manufacturing and agricultural sectors, it lessens the need for unskilled labor and unemployment rises in those sectors. If there is no infrastructure to help the unemployed train for the globalized economy, the social services in the country may become strained, trying to cave for the new underclasses. So that's end our lecture for today about the global economy, the structures of globalization. For our next video, we will discuss about the market integration as part of the contemporary world's global economy. Thank you for listening, everybody. I hope you learned something about the global economy. If you like this video, don't forget to hit like and subscribe and click the notification bell to receive updates on my new uploads. Thank you so much, everybody, and stay safe. God bless everyone.